Monster Hunter has always been one of the best series of games I've ever played. In a world where humans simply coexist amongst other wildlife in the food chain, monster hunters are tasked with killing dangerous monsters disturbing local ecosystems in order to preserve the natural biodiversity of the world. At its core, the series emulates the high-octane, visceral experience of hunting. But, unlike that pussy Cabela shit, Monster Hunter takes the whole concept and elevates it to a much grander scale. Unlike the world of Monster Hunter, hunting in real life is comically unfair. Somewhere in the world, a deer will be enjoying its last few seconds of its life relaxing by a river, only to be obliterated by some camouflage fat fuck sitting in a tree stand 100 feet in the air, off in the fucking distance with the wind blowing towards them, but they still covered up their scent with duck piss or whatever. Like, these dudes are coming in locked and loaded, shooting off nature's equivalent to a fucking Call of Duty Black Ops kill streak. What could the deer even do? They're just chilling by a river, couldn't even see the guy, couldn't smell them, and they got a pair of antlers. That's it. They didn't even stand a fucking chance. In fact, the only challenging aspect of hunting in real life is whether or not the animal ends up getting insta-killed in one shot or ends up running away, shitting itself. That's all there is to it. Meanwhile, in the world of Monster Hunter, you play the game as the deer. With only the surrounding environment and some basic weapons and tools at your disposal, your goal is to fight tooth and nail against ruthless monsters who are well equipped to kill you in 2 to 4 hits if they actually wanted to. And the challenge and fun of the game is eventually killing the monster and overcoming the seemingly impossible odds. At the start of every mission, you're immediately thrown into the field and tasked with fighting a monster in an elaborate 10 to 20 minute boss fight encounter. And once you kill the monster, you go back to your town hub to resupply your items and craft new weapons and armor to, once again, go on another mission to kill an even stronger monster in an even more elaborate 10 to 20 minute boss fight encounter. And this process repeats itself for the entire game, where you're constantly jumping from boss fight to boss fight as the game continuously one-ups itself by challenging you to fight even stronger monsters with new attacks and abilities. In most video games, boss fights are usually the most fondly remembered parts of the experience, built up over the course of many hours spent fighting off hordes of weaker opponents that you couldn't care less about. But Monster Hunter just cuts out all the bullshit and gets straight to the good stuff. The Monster Hunter series essentially condenses the best parts of your favorite video games and just makes that the entire game. And it works. It works incredibly well. Now, unlike my previous videos, I'm recommending the Monster Hunter series as a whole. And the reason for this distinction is because every game that's ever been released is pretty much the same exact game. To put it simply, there's only 2 games in the Monster Hunter series. There's Monster Hunter and there's Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter is a PS2 game released in 2004, and every sequel following it up to Monster Hunter Generations has been a slightly improved version of the same game, usually with some new monsters, weapons, gameplay mechanics, and other miscellaneous improvements thrown into the mix. The games all reuse the same graphics, the same combat system, the same crafting system, the same quest system, the same maps, the same level structure, the same monsters, weapons, the same fucking everything. But despite all of that, the core gameplay of Monster Hunter was so fucking fun that most fans didn't care. Now, as great as the old Monster Hunter games were, it was always a series of games that you'd have to cautiously recommend to people. As you can imagine, since each game was always built up from the previous games in the series, there was always a lot of problems with the series as a whole that were never addressed as time went on. For example, the graphics and level design quickly became outdated, the games usually did a terrible job at explaining how to play, a lot of useful information that could help new players was just obfuscated and incredibly hard to find, and going on the internet to seek out help or look up information was essentially mandatory. And as time went on, these issues were either never resolved or had poorly implemented solutions. So when Capcom released Monster Hunter World, it was a big fucking deal. They vastly improved the graphics, the levels were open world and fully realized, the game actually had proper tutorials, they explained how to play the fucking game. You can view the weapon trees in-game so you could actually find out what weapons you can make. The game's added a shit ton of quality of life features that improve the experience. And best of all, the gameplay systems which made the original games great were completely uncompromised and were just as good as they've ever been. It was fucking amazing! Monster Hunter World was the renaissance of the series that kickstarted its extreme popularity, and with the addition of the Iceborne expansion and Monster Hunter Rise being released on the Switch, there's never been a more perfect time to get into the series than now. So with all that said, why should you play Monster Hunter? Well, to put it simply, fighting monsters in Monster Hunter is the fucking hypest shit. It's so fucking fun. Some monsters are covered in armor, some are extremely fast and aggressive, some can fly in the air and shoot fireballs at you. Certain monsters can inflict status effects that make you fall asleep or poison you or paralyze you. Monsters can also become enraged and attack faster while sometimes gaining new abilities or status buffs or completely different movesets mid-fight. Monster Hunter does not fuck around. These monsters are fucking scary. They will fuck you up. At any moment during the fight, monsters can easily attack you, knock you down to the ground, inflict you with annoying status ailment, and then hit you again and end up stunning you and landing a final blow in an elaborate 3-hit combo, killing you in a matter of seconds. The thrill of Monster Hunter is that players have to constantly be on the defensive. Monsters will rarely give you a large window of time to wail away on them unless you knock them down yourself or incapacitate them in some way. So utilizing brief windows between attacks to land a counter hit and create more opportunities for attacking them is the key to killing the monster. Now, the beauty of Monster Hunter is that while the monsters have a huge advantage over the hunters, they are also susceptible to the same kinds of attacks and status ailments, which presents the fights with a sort of fairness where hunters and monsters both abide by the same rules. For example, the hunter's stamina gauge will deplete over time during the hunt, and you have to eat food to bring their maximum stamina back to normal. But monsters also have their own stamina gauge as well, and if they keep spamming attacks during the fight, you can eventually wear it down and cause them to attack less frequently, eventually causing them to run away to hunt down a smaller monster to eat them to regain their own stamina. Monsters can constantly abuse hunters and toss them across the map like a bag of shit, but hunters can also knock out monsters by bashing their skulls in with blunt attacks, or they can even cut off their tail with a severing attack to limit their attack range. The fights can sometimes feel extremely one-sided, where the monster is just relentlessly beating the shit out of you and you have no fucking chance, but the fun of the game is gaining small victories throughout the course of the battle where you're able to slowly turn the tables and start beating the shit out of them. Winding up a massive swing to land the perfect hit at just the right time for the monster to get knocked away as their body parts fly off feels incredible. And being able to make the stars align at just the right moment to experience it firsthand is what makes the combat system so enthralling. Overall, the combat mechanics of Monster Hunter set the stage for hunters to pull off some of the most cinematic, crazy shit you can think of. And the fact that it all happens naturally during a high-stakes boss fight only makes these moments all the more satisfying. Compounding on all these mechanics is the insanely in-depth crafting system that hunters can use to make potions, hunting tools, and other consumable items you can use during battle. You can catch a monster sleeping during the hunt and blow them up with explosives. You can craft flash bombs and stun monsters flying in the air and crash them into the ground. You can drink an antidote to remove a monster's poison from your body. You can create a pitfall trap and tranquilize a monster to capture it alive for different rewards at the end of the mission, and the list just goes on and on and on. After hunting a monster, you can even carve body parts from it and then use them to craft new weapons and armor. Each armor set in the game usually grants players skills which benefit certain weapon types or unique playstyles, and the abilities of the equipment is always dependent on the abilities of the monster you've hunted. For example, the parts from monsters which utilize fire attacks will typically craft an armor set that has good fire resistance. Monster parts from a monster with high mobility can give the player skills on their armor, which increases their mobility. And if a monster uses a lot of attacks that inflict lightning damage, you can usually craft a weapon from its monster parts that also inflicts lightning damage. And this same concept also applies to pretty much every stat in the entire game. So with all that said, that's basically the core experience of Monster Hunter. You bust your ass fighting a monster to carve it up and craft a more powerful weapon or armor set, and then you use your newly acquired equipment to then fight even more stronger monsters to obtain even better monster parts, which can craft stronger equipment with better stats and armor skills. And it's through this ebb and flow of fighting monsters, gathering materials, and crafting new weapons and armor where Monster Hunter becomes the most addicting game I've ever played. You can easily dump hundreds of hours into the game and the time just flies by instantly. It has all the addicting number crunching elements of traditional RPGs through its armor and weapon system, while also having an incredible combat system on top of it, which makes the grinding process extremely fun. Another spice of variety to the combat system is the 14 different weapon types that hunters can use throughout the game, and this is where things get pretty fucking crazy. Each weapon in the game has different attacks, varied movement options, different defensive abilities, abilities, unique modes or stances which can activate different combos or abilities, entirely unique meters displayed on screen which can give the hunter status buffs or activate different combos based on performing certain actions with the weapon, and some weapons can even transform into other weapons mid-battle and do other shit. I've easily played over 700 hours of Monster Hunter over the course of 10 years and 5 games, and I only ever used about 4 weapons, and I still don't know how to use half of them. That's how fucking crazy this shit is. For example, the Insect Glaive is one of my favorite weapons which was added in Monster Hunter 4, and the mechanics surrounding it are massively complex. It's a staff weapon where you can control a Kinsect as a projectile, and while it sounds simple enough, the gimmick of the weapon is that when the Kinsect attacks a monster, it can extract 3 different colored essences which represent different status buffs it can give to the hunter. The red buff will alter some of your combos and make each attack hit multiple times per button input for 60 seconds. The white buff will increase the hunter's movement speed for 90 seconds, and the orange buff will increase the hunter's defense and give them slight knockback resistance to weaker attacks for 45 seconds. Now, the fun of the Insect Glaive is that all the buffs stack on each other and can create different effects when combined. The red and white buff gives the hunter all the benefits of each buff plus a 20% attack boost for 60 seconds. The white and orange buff gives the hunter all the benefits of each buff plus a 6% defense boost and the earplugs armor skill which allows the hunter to not get staggered when monsters roar for 60 seconds. And the combination of all 3 buffs gives the hunter all the benefits of each 3 buffs with a plus 25% attack boost and a plus 8 defense boost and the earplugs armor skill and a unique Kinsect bonus buff depending on the Kinsect you're using, and that final combined triple buff will last for 60 seconds. Now, the tricky part with getting these buffs is that each colored essence corresponds to a certain body part on the monster, where the red buff is usually obtained from the monster's head, the white buff is usually obtained from the monster's legs or wings, and the orange buff is usually obtained from the monster's tail. The challenge to getting these buffs is that you have to maneuver the Kinsect to attack each part of the monster's body in order to obtain each colored buff and obtain the overpowered combined triple buff. The best way to do this is to manually shoot the Kinsect from a short range directly in front of the monster part you want to hit, but for some monsters the locations required to hit can be pretty tricky, in which case you can shoot out a pheromone bullet that will make the Kinsect automatically travel to the marked spot on the monster. Now, you can also equip different Kinsects to make this process much easier. Some Kinsects can fly faster and thus make it easier to gather the essence from the monster spot you want to hit. You can equip slower Kinsects which can gather 2 buffs at once, and you can even use a Kinsect that will make the triple buff last a longer duration due to its unique Kinsect bonus. But like I said, each Kinsect you equip will also have its own different stats with different utility depending on the unique Kinsect bonus buff you get from obtaining all 3 colored buffs. Now, I know what you're thinking. Wow, this sounds like a giant pain in the ass. I'm just gonna use dual blades and activate demon mode and just flail my body around like a brainless chimpanzee. And you know what? You're not wrong. But the true reason why the Insect Glaive is amazing is because not only does it provide you with extremely powerful buffs, but it also excels at having high mobility by utilizing aerial combat. With the Insect Glaive, hunters can vault through the air to evade attacks, can even dash midair and attack the monster. And with the red buff, you can also get a really fun aerial attack which allows the hunter to bounce off the monster and keep moving through the air in order to continuously combo the monster in the air indefinitely, with the added bonus of just avoiding all of its attacks because you're just flying through the air like a goddamn psycho. It's like the fucking hypest shit. Now, if this sounds incredibly complicated, it's because it is. Over the course of the series, Monster Hunter has taken the simple premise of hunting monsters and has continued to add features upon features upon features upon features upon features upon features of new monsters, weapons, items, new combat mechanics, new environments to essentially create a massively in-depth boss fighting game. It's fucking awesome. It's fucking amazing. Now, with all of that said, I don't want newcomers to get overwhelmed because while it's a lot of fun to learn every single mechanic for your favorite weapon, it's by no means required. At the end of the day, as long as you learn 1 or 2 good attacks or combos that work well for you, then that's all you really need to get by. In fact, one of my new favorite weapons in Monster Hunter Rise is the hammer, and the only thing I did throughout the entire game was hold ZR to charge up my hammer and then run up to the monster and hit them in the face. And with this one and only tactic, I was able to kill every single monster in the entire game, and I was having a fucking blast the whole way through. Of course, there's a lot more complexity with the hammer, where you can charge switch between 2 different hammer modes, and you can stock a level 3 charge by switching from purple to yellow, and there's different attacks and combos which you can use depending on the color charge you currently have, but knowing how all that works isn't really necessary. At the end of the day, all you gotta do is hit the monster in the face. That's all you gotta do. It's gonna die eventually, it doesn't fucking matter. I can make the Insect Glaive sound absurdly complicated, but all you gotta do is get your Kinsect and hit the monster in the face. Boom, you got the red buff, your attacks don't suck anymore. That's all you gotta do. Oh man, I got the great sword. When the weapon's drawn out, you move like shit and it's super heavy. I can't do anything. Oh no. But guess what? This is what you do. Just run to the monster, charge up your sword, and hit them in the fucking face, and then sheath your sword and run away. Congratulations, you have now mastered the great sword. Now, the point I'm trying to make is that there's a lot to learn in Monster Hunter, and there's tons of ways to improve yourself and pull off some insane shit. But the barrier to entry is also drastically low if your only goal is to kill the monsters and beat the game in the most boring way possible. Believe it or not, the games aren't as difficult as hardcore Monster Hunter fans would want you to believe, even for the older games. Of course, the actual challenge of the older games wasn't the combat system itself, but more so all the other obtuse factors, like the terrible camera system you control with the fucking D-pad and the complete lack of proper in-game tutorials, and all the other convoluted shit that was just so poorly explained that the only way to figure it out was by looking up a tutorial on YouTube so some fucking nerd could break it down over the course of 12 videos to actually explain how the fucking game works. Meanwhile, while the modern games are still pretty complicated, they provide way more information in-game in a much more streamlined approach, making the games way more accessible as a result. It'll still take some time to acclimate yourself to the controls and figure things out, but if you're willing to take your time to learn how to play, it'll easily become one of the best gaming experiences you'll ever have. So as someone who wants to get more people playing Monster Hunter, I want to give you guys some pretty basic tips that'll help you out. Right from the start of the game, the first thing you want to figure out is what weapons you want to use. In Monster Hunter World and onward, the best way to do this is to find the training room in the overworld hub, press some buttons to get a basic handle of the weapon, and then pick out whatever feels good to you. You actually start the game with every basic weapon type already in your item box, so all you have to do is swap out your equipment in the training room to try everything out. You can also access a ton of important information about each weapon by checking the weapon controls in your hunter notes, as well as some pretty basic combos to give you an idea of how each weapon works. So do some fun reading and actually learn how to do stuff. Now, once you picked out your weapon and you're going into your first mission, the most important thing to do is to not die. If you faint during a mission, you'll respawn back at the main campsite and will earn less rewards at the end of the mission. And if you faint 3 times during a fight, then you'll fail the mission altogether, get sent back to town, and lose all your progress. So you don't want that to happen, so what do you gotta do? Well, you need healing items. So to stock yourself up on tons of healing items, you can purchase standard potions in the hub and bring them into missions, and you can also craft mega potions by combining the potions with honey. The benefit of this is not only having stronger potions which heal you more, but you'll also be able to carry full stacks of potions and mega potions in your inventory all at once because they count as separate items, essentially doubling your potion count. By playing through the single player missions, you'll also unlock a material farm that will allow you to passively farm materials in between missions. So the second you unlock it, start farming that fucking honey so you can make as many mega potions as possible. In fact, whenever you see honey out in the field, just go grab it. In fact, grab as many items as humanly possible. Grab everything. Everything is useful somehow. Even if you don't know what it does, it'll be useful later. Just grab it just in case you might need it, maybe. Most importantly, if you want to restock your items for your next mission, you can register an item loadout which will automatically store all the items you don't want back in your item box and restock all the potions and other items you want to take with you. It's incredibly helpful and saves you a shit ton of time. So just create a standard item loadout you want to use for every mission and restock your items using the loadout. In between missions, you can also eat food at the canteen to give your hunter a temporary health and stamina boost for your next mission. And doing this is essentially mandatory, and you should do it for every single mission. There is absolutely no reason not to. Finally, once you get deeper into the game and start getting absolutely bodied by monsters by losing 75% of your health in one hit, then that probably means you need to upgrade your armor. You can upgrade your armor with armor spheres, which you can obtain in various ways, but it's actually much easier to simply craft a new set of armor instead, as your existing armor sets will quickly become outdated as you progress through the low rank missions. Now, there's way more to learn, and I've barely touched the surface of what this game has to offer, but if I covered absolutely everything, this video could literally be an hour and a half long, and frankly, you can figure it out on your own. This is by far the most basic beginner information I can give you that will at least get your foot into the door and hopefully make things less overwhelming when you get started. So with all of that said, if Monster Hunter sounds cool to you, then the best game to start with will always be the latest version of the game you can get your hands on. The latest game will always have the most people playing it, it'll usually be the most accessible to new players with a lot of very straightforward tutorials that actually explain how to play the game, and while the combat mechanics are much more complicated than the previous games, it's still much easier to learn than having to deal with all the convoluted stupid shit from the older games. At the recording of this video, Monster Hunter Rise is definitely the best game game to play right now. But once the next Monster Hunter game comes out with more monsters and other new content to play through, then you'll probably want to play that game instead. Like I said earlier, every game is more or less an improved version of the same experience. So just keep in mind that this video could just as easily apply to any Monster Hunter game released in the nearby future. Now, if you don't have a Nintendo Switch, Monster Hunter World with the Iceborne expansion is also a great place to start as well, as it's more or less the same style of gameplay as Monster Hunter Rise with all of the quality of life features that have made the modern series fantastic. Finally, if you ever decide to play through these games and are still itching for more, then Monster Hunter Generations Ultimate on the Nintendo Switch is pretty great too. It's essentially a giant compilation game of every single Monster Hunter game prior to World. So if you want to go back and get a refined taste of old school Monster Hunter without dealing with too much convoluted bullshit, then this is the game to play. Anyways, that's Monster Hunter. As a series of video games, it's about as theoretically perfect as you can get. Each game features the same core mechanics that you'd always expect. It continues to add new features and build upon what it previously established with actual innovative concepts to keep things fresh. And it doesn't go off the rails with wacky new concepts to appeal to a completely new audience of players who don't give a shit. Monster Hunter consistently excels at exactly what it sets out to do. Back-to-back, insanely challenging monster fights with a massively in-depth combat system with tons of weapons and armor sets and hunting tools and cats. Lots of cats. And now dogs. Lots of dogs and cats, and there's an owl, and you can pet the owl and you can dress it up in cute outfits. It's fucking awesome. Game of the fucking year.